Rain hammered the empty highway as Obinna shoved Nkiru out of the car. She hit the wet ground hard, one hand clutching her burning stomach, the other reaching for the man who had once sworn before God to protect her. Her lips trembled. "Please, hospital." But Obinna only stared at her with cold, frightened eyes, then slammed the door and drove away, leaving her alone under the storm with no money, no phone, and no strength left to stand. Minutes later, through the blur of rain and tears, weak headlights appeared in the distance. Nkiru did not know it yet, but the night her husband left her to die was the night his own destruction quietly began. What would you do if you saw someone abandon their sick spouse on a lonely road? Would you call it fear, cruelty, or pure evil? Tell me in the comments. And where are you watching from today? What time is it in your country right now? If you enjoy emotional, powerful stories with deep twists and unforgettable payoffs, subscribe and join this journey. The headlights did not belong to an ambulance. They belonged to an old delivery truck with one dim lamp and a rattling engine that sounded as tired as the night itself. It slowed when the driver noticed the shape on the roadside. At first he thought it was a sack thrown from another vehicle. Then the sack moved. He slammed the brakes. Rain hissed against the metal roof as he climbed down, pulling a lantern from the cabin. The yellow glow fell over Nkiru's face. Her skin glistened with fever. Mud clung to her wrapper. Her lips were cracked, and her breath came in broken little pulls, as if even air had become too heavy for her lungs. "Hey!" the driver shouted over the rain. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened for less than a second. "Please," she whispered, "don't let me die." The man, a broad-shouldered driver named Kunle, looked up and down the road. No other car, no houses, no lights. Just darkness and storm and the soft sound of a woman slipping out of consciousness. He cursed under his breath, then bent to lift her. She cried out when his hands touched her stomach, not the cry of surprise, the cry of someone whose body had already known too much pain. Kunle froze. His expression changed. This was no simple roadside collapse. Something was deeply wrong. He wrapped his coat around her and carried her to the truck. She was frighteningly light, as if sorrow had been eating from the inside for months. He laid her across the passenger seat and noticed two things at once. Her wrists were bruised, faint but visible, and her handbag was gone. No phone, no papers, nothing. Someone had not just abandoned her, someone had erased her. By the time he reached the village on the edge of the highway, rainwater had soaked through his sleeves, and Nkiru had stopped responding. Kunle did not take her to the tiny clinic first. He took her somewhere else, to the only person he trusted to fight death with bare hands if necessary. Mama Ifeoma's roadside eatery was closed, but a small lamp still burned inside. Kunle hammered at the back door until bolts scraped, and an older woman opened it with a wooden spoon in one hand and fury in her eyes. "You want to break my door before dawn?" Then she saw the woman in his arms. Everything in her face changed. "What happened?" "Found her near the East Road," Kunle said. "Barely alive." Mama Ifeoma moved fast, faster than women half her age. She cleared the narrow bed in the back room, threw dry cloths onto the mattress, and began issuing orders before Kunle had finished laying Nkiru down. "Boil water, now, and wake Ngozi. Tell her I need the medicine box." Kunle obeyed. Minutes later, steam filled the room. Mama Ifeoma cleaned the mud from Nkiru's face and arms. Under the grime, she found more bruises, some old, some new. Her mouth tightened. She had seen women like this before. Women whose husbands spoke softly in public and destroyed them in private. Women who were told to endure. Women who endured until their bodies began to tell the truth their mouths were too afraid to say. Nkiru's fever was burning. Her pulse was weak, and her stomach was rigid beneath the cloth, making Mama Ifeoma glance toward the shelf where her Bible sat beside a jar of dried cloves. "Who did this to you?" she murmured. Nkiru did not answer, but her lips moved. Kunle leaned closer. "What is she saying?" At first it sounded like nonsense. Fragments. Broken sounds. Then the word came again. "Chisum?" Mama Ifeoma looked at Kunle. "Is that her child?" He shook his head. "I found her alone. Brother, I don't know. Doctor, I don't know." Mama Ifeoma pressed the back of her hand to Nkiru's forehead. The heat frightened even her. "Go get the clinic assistant," she said. "Not the old man. The young one. The careful one." Kunle left again. The hours before dawn passed in fragments of urgency. Wet cloth on the forehead, bitter medicine under the tongue, a basin of cloudy water, more whispering, more trembling. Once Nkiru jerked awake and grabbed Mama Ifeoma's wrist with surprising strength. He took everything she gasped. "Who?" "My husband." That was all. Then darkness swallowed her again. By sunrise, the storm had weakened into a grey drizzle. The village began to stir, smoke lifted from cook fires. Roosters argued with the dawn. Somewhere outside, women were already sweeping their front steps. But inside the back room of the eatery, a silence hung heavy and tight. The clinic assistant, a quiet young man named Toby, had arrived just after first light. He examined Nkiru carefully, asking small questions that Mama Ifeoma answered with growing irritation because she hated helplessness. He checked her temperature, her eyes, her breathing, then her stomach. His face sharpened. "How long has she been like this?" "We don't know." He asked if she had eaten, if she had vomited, if she had bled, if she had convulsed. The answers were uncertain. They only had a half-dead stranger and a trail of mystery. Toby sat back and wiped his hands. "This is more than exhaustion." Mama Ifeoma folded her arms. "Say it clearly." He lowered his voice, though Nkiru was barely conscious. "There are signs of prolonged weakness, yes. Malnutrition, severe dehydration, maybe infection. But—" He hesitated. "But what?" "But I have seen women react like this after taking repeated doses of the wrong medication, or medication given for the wrong reason." Kunle, now standing by the doorway, frowned. "You mean poison?" "I said the wrong medication." Toby looked at Nkiru again. "Sometimes poison comes in a bottle with a neat label." The words settled over the room like dust after collapse. Mama Ifeoma turned toward the bed. She looked again at the bruises, at the hollow cheeks, at the way Nkiru flinched even in sleep as though fear itself had moved into her bones. This woman had not simply fallen ill. She had been managed, weakened, carried to the edge of ruin one careful step at a time. Outside, news began to spread in the way village news always spread: too fast, too incomplete, and never without judgment. A strange woman had been found on the road. A husband had thrown her away. No, she had run from home. No, she was a thief. No, she was cursed. No, she was pregnant. No, she had lost the child. By noon, half the village had invented its own version of Nkiru's pain. Mama Ifeoma ignored them all. She fed Nkiru thin porridge by spoon when the fever eased enough for swallowing. She changed the sheets herself. She refused to let curious women crowd the doorway. When one of them whispered that abandoned wives often brought trouble, "Wherever they went, Mama," Ifeoma stared so hard, the woman nearly tripped over her own feet, leaving. In the afternoon, Nkiru woke properly for the first time, not fully strong, not even fully present, but awake. Her eyes moved across the room with panic first, not gratitude. That told Mama Ifeoma more than words could. Safe people did not wake like hunted animals. "You are safe here," Mama Ifeoma said. Nkiru tried to sit up, Pain cut through her so sharply that she bent forward with a broken sound. "No." Mama Ifeoma steadied her shoulders. "Don't force your body to prove anything. It has already survived enough." Nkiru's eyes filled at once. Not with soft tears, with ashamed tears. The kind that come from being seen when one has spent too long trying not to be seen at all. "Where am I?" she whispered. "In Ajanaku village, near the East Road." "Kunle found you," Nkiru swallowed. Her lips trembled. "My bag, gone. My papers, gone." My husband Mama Ifeoma's expression did not change, but her voice became gentler. "He is not here." That should have comforted her. Instead, Nkiru looked terrified. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, then winced again. Her breathing quickened. Toby's warning echoed in Mama Ifeoma's mind. Wrong medication. Prolonged weakness. Not natural, not simple. "What is your name?" Mama Ifeoma asked softly. There was a pause long enough to hurt, as though Nkiru had to search for herself under layers of pain before answering. "Nkiru." "Good. Nkiru, listen to me. No one here will touch you without your permission. No one here will send you away. But if we are to help you, you must tell us something." "What happened on that road?" Nkiru stared at her hands. For a long moment, all that could be heard was rain dripping from the roof edge outside. Then she said, "He said I was too expensive to keep alive." Kunle turned away with a curse. Mama Ifeoma did not move. Nkiru's voice was dry and thin, but each word came clearer now, as if pain were forcing truth to the surface. "I had been sick for months, maybe longer. I don't know anymore. Tablets every day, tonics, sleeping medicine. He said the doctor prescribed them, but I never saw the paper myself. I kept getting weaker. Every time I asked questions, he said I was ungrateful. Every time I cried, he said I was making things harder for him." She stopped pressing her hand to her stomach again. Mama Ifeoma noticed. So did Tobe. "What is it?" he asked carefully. Nkiru's face changed, not from pain alone, from memory. Her hand trembled. "I used to talk to—" She closed her eyes. "To someone?" Chisholm Mama Ifeoma asked. Nkiru's eyes flew open. For the first time, real fear entered the room. "How do you know that name? You kept saying it in your fever." The room went very still. Nkiru looked away, and a tear slipped down the side of her face into her hairline. "Don't ask me that yet," she whispered. Mama Ifeoma exchanged a look with Tobe. Not now, but soon, because that name was not random. And whatever it meant, it sat very close to the center of this woman's ruin. As dusk approached, Mama Ifeoma stepped outside to breathe. The clouds were clearing at last. The air smelled of wet earth smoke and boiled cassava. Behind her inside the eatery, Nkiru was alive. Fragile, wounded, frightened, but alive. Kunle came to stand beside her. "Will she make it?" Mama Ifeoma kept her eyes on the road where he had found her. "Yes," she said at last. "I think she will." Then her gaze hardened. But whatever sent her to that road is still alive, too. Inside on the narrow bed, Nkiru drifted into uneasy sleep again. One hand remained curled against her stomach. Her breathing had steadied, but her face held the shadow of someone who had not yet reached the bottom of the truth. And somewhere far from that small village, a man who thought he had buried his wife inside a storm was beginning his mourning as though nothing had happened. He did not know that death had refused her. He did not know that witnesses existed. He did not know that the first crack in his carefully built lie had already opened. All he knew was silence. And silence before justice arrives is often the most dangerous sound of all. The village did not sleep deeply. It whispered. By the second morning, everyone in Ajanaku seemed to know that the woman from the roadside had a name. Nkiru. Some said it with pity. Some with curiosity. Some with the cruel satisfaction people sometimes feel when another person's suffering makes their own life seem safer. Mama Ifeoma cared about none of them. She cared about the way Nkiru still woke in fright whenever a car engine passed. She cared about the way the young woman hesitated before drinking anything as though every cup might contain betrayal. She cared about the way Nkiru apologized for taking up space, even while shivering under blankets in a room that smelled of ginger soap and wood smoke. That apology bothered her most. People who had only been hurt by life apologized differently. Softer. Randomly. But people who had been broken by another human being apologized like trained prisoners. Automatically. Fearfully. For breathing too loudly, for needing water, for existing at the wrong time. On the third day, the fever finally dropped. Not completely, but enough for Nkiru's eyes to clear. Mama Ifeoma carried in a bowl of pap and set it on the stool beside the bed. Morning sunlight crept through the curtain in pale strips, touching the wall, the floor, and the small brass cross hanging above the doorway. "You will eat, Mama," Ifeoma said. Nkiru gave a weak nod. She tried to lift the spoon. Her hand shook. Mama Ifeoma took the bowl and fed her without comment. For a while there was only the scrape of spoon against bowl. Then Mama Ifeoma said, "Tell me about your husband." Nkiru's throat tightened visibly. She looked down at the blanket fingers pulling at a loose thread. "His name is Obinna." "Was." Nkiru blinked. Mama Ifeoma's face did not soften. "A man who leaves his wife on the road at night in the rain has given up the right to be spoken of like a husband." Something flickered across Nkiru's face. Not joy, not peace. Permission. The permission to stop defending the person who had destroyed her. "He wasn't always cruel in public," Nkiru said quietly. "That was the worst part. He knew how to look kind when other people were watching." Mama Ifeoma did not appear surprised. At first, Nkiru went on, he was attentive. Careful? Patient. He said he admired that I was not proud. He said I had a calm spirit. He brought gifts even when I told him not to waste money. He listened when I spoke about my parents. She paused, then gave a bitter little laugh. Or maybe he only listened because he was searching for what Nkiru's eyes moved slowly toward the window, as if memory stood outside it. "My father used to say some things should never be discussed around hungry people." She swallowed. "I thought he meant poor people. I know now he meant greedy ones." That sentence hung in the room. Mama Ifeoma sat down. Nkiru's voice gained steadiness as she continued, though every word seemed to cost her something. "My parents died within 2 years of each other. After that, everything became confusion. Family meetings, arguments, advice I didn't ask for. There was talk of land outside the city, land my father had once mentioned, but never showed me directly. He used to say it would protect my future. But after he died, no one could find the main papers." Mama Ifeoma narrowed her eyes. No one in Nkiru's mouth tightened. No one who wanted me to be safe. Before Mama Ifeoma could reply, a knock sounded on the door frame. It was Ngozi, the teenage girl who helped at the eatery. She carried a bundle of freshly washed clothes and a curious expression she was trying badly to hide. What Ngozi straightened. "I only came to drop these." Mama Ifeoma took the bundle. "Then drop them and leave your curiosity outside." The girl fled. For the first time since waking properly, Nkiru smiled. It was faint, fragile, but real. That too mattered. "Good," Mama Ifeoma said. "Your face remembers how." The smile vanished almost at once, replaced by something darker. "I don't know how I forgot." "You did not forget, Mama," Ifeoma said. Pain covered it. Silence returned, but this one was gentler. Later that afternoon, while Nkiru slept, Mama Ifeoma sorted through the few things that had been found with her. There was almost nothing. The wrapper she had worn that night, a cheap pair of sandals with one strap half torn, a small handkerchief, stiff with dried rainwater and mud. Mama Ifeoma would have thrown the handkerchief into the wash basin if not for the way the corner felt oddly thick between her fingers. She frowned. The fabric had been folded and stitched at the edge. Not neatly, desperately, as though someone had hidden something there in haste. She went to the kitchen shelf, took a small knife, and carefully loosened the thread. A slip of paper slid into her palm. Her eyes sharpened at once. It was old, folded many times. The ink had faded, but not beyond reading. She unfolded it slowly, flattening it against the table with her broad, flour-dusted fingers. It was not a letter. It was a copy of a land registration record. Partial, torn at one corner, but official enough to make her pulse kick once in her throat. She stared at the names, then at the location. Not village farmland, not a family compound, a tract of land near the expanding edge of Enugu in an area where developers had already begun swallowing quiet places and turning them into shining, expensive promises. The kind of land people lied for, fought for, killed for if greed ripened far enough. And beside the inheritance notation, though partly smudged, one name remained visible. Nkiru Ezeanyi. Mama Ifeoma sat back slowly. So, there it was. Not proof of everything, but proof of enough. By evening she waited until Nkiru had eaten and regained some strength before bringing the paper to the bedside. "I found this in your handkerchief." Nkiru took it carefully. At first she did not understand what she was seeing. Then her breath caught. Her fingers began to tremble. "No, you know it." Nkiru stared harder, her face drained. "I haven't seen this since before the wedding." "Then explain." For a few seconds Nkiru looked as though the bed had vanished beneath her. Her eyes were no longer in the room. They were somewhere far behind her in a different house, a different time, under a different roof. "My father used to keep documents in a locked metal box," she whispered. "He was a careful man, even with people he loved. He said paperwork was like memory. If the wrong hands touched it, your future could be rewritten without your knowledge." Her voice faltered. "After he died, the box disappeared." "Who was in the house when it disappeared?" "My aunt. 2 cousins. And—" She stopped, and Obinna Nkiru closed her eyes. "He was not my husband yet." Her voice came out flat now, emptied by the shape of the truth forming beneath it. But he was already very close to the family. Helpful. Present. Always volunteering to carry files, to answer calls, to settle things. Everyone praised him, said he was dependable. Mama Ifeoma made a low sound in her throat. She had known many dependable men. Many of them were only dependable when there was profit at the end of the errand. Nkiru turned the paper over, as if hoping another answer might be written on the back. There was nothing. "After we married, she said I asked about my father's land 1 or 2 times. Obinna always dismissed it, said people had exaggerated its value, said there was probably nothing left. Said I should stop listening to old family stories and focus on being a wife." The last word came out bitter. Mama Ifeoma watched her carefully. "And you believed him?" "I wanted peace." Nkiru's lips trembled. "That is what women are told to want, isn't it? Peace at any price. Silence at any price, endurance at any price." Mama Ifeoma's gaze deepened. Nkiru continued more quietly now. "Whenever I pressed too much, he became cold. Not shouting. Not at first. Just colder. He would stop speaking to me for days. He would eat food I cooked without looking at me. At night he would turn his back and make me feel as if I had committed some sin by asking about what my father left me. She looked at the paper again. Then the sickness started, the weakness, the dizziness. He said stress was making me imagine things. And now Mama Ifeoma asked. Nkiru lifted her eyes. Now there was no confusion in them, only a devastating, growing clarity. Now I think he married me because of this. The room seemed to narrow. Even the evening noises from outside, the clatter of plates, the distant laughter of children, the calling of goats felt farther away. Mama Ifeoma did not rush to comfort her. Some truths should land hard. Otherwise, the soul never stops bargaining with them. "Say it fully," she said. Nkiru looked at the document, then at her own hands, as if seeing the map of her life rearrange itself in cruel lines. "I think Obinna knew there was land. I think he believed there were papers somewhere. I think he stayed close to my family long before he loved me, if he ever loved me at all." Her breathing sharpened. "And when he could not get everything cleanly, he made me weak enough to control." There it was. The first true shape of the betrayal. Not a husband who grew tired of a sick wife. A hunter who disguised himself as a shelter. Nkiru pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth, but the sob escaped anyway. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. Small. Crushed. The sound of a person mourning not just what was done to her, but the years she had handed willingly to a lie. Mama Ifeoma moved to the bed and sat beside her. For a moment, Nkiru resisted pride still alive beneath the damage. Then she broke. She leaned forward, shoulders shaking, and wept into the older woman's wrapper like a child who had run too far, carrying pain alone. "He used to pray with me," she choked out. "Do you understand? He prayed with me." "Mama." Ifeoma held her head and let the grief come. "Yes," she said. "That is why this kind of evil wounds deeper, because it borrows the language of love." Night settled fully before Nkiru could speak again. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes were swollen, but something had changed. She looked less like prey and more like someone standing at the entrance of a long, brutal road. "What do I do now?" she asked. Mama Ifeoma took the land document from the blanket and refolded it carefully. "First you heal enough to stand." Nkiru nodded slowly. Then she whispered. Mama Ifeoma's gaze turned toward the dark window where her own reflection stood like a witness. Then she said, "We find out how much of your life was stolen." In the yard outside, the wind moved through the plantain leaves with a dry, restless sound. Inside, Nkiru lay back against the pillow, exhausted, but no longer blind. Somewhere in the city, Obinna still believed the past was buried on a roadside under rain. He did not know that a torn paper had survived. He did not know that memory had begun to return. And he did not know that the woman he had called a burden had just uncovered the first piece of the fortune he tried to take from her. The weak woman he abandoned was still wounded. But now she had something stronger than strength. She had direction. Recovery did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like work. Slow, humiliating, repetitive work. For the first 2 weeks, Nkiru could not walk from the back room to the kitchen without stopping to breathe. Her legs trembled under her own weight. Her hands sometimes failed her in the middle of simple tasks. The fever had gone, but it had left behind a body that no longer trusted itself. Some mornings, she woke thinking she had made progress, only to sit up and feel the room tilt. On those mornings, shame came quickly. Mama Ifeoma hated shame almost as much as she hated wicked men. "Do not insult survival by calling it weakness," she told Nkiru one morning after finding her crying over a dropped cup. "You are rebuilding a house after fire." Of course, everything is slow. So Nkiru learned slowness. She learned to sip broth without apologizing. She learned to stand in sunlight for 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. She learned that trembling did not mean failure. It meant the body was still negotiating with life. And while her strength returned inch by inch, her mind began doing something more dangerous. It began remembering. Not in one clean line, in flashes. Obinna's hand setting tablets beside a glass of water. His smile when visitors came. The way his tone sharpened whenever she asked about money. The way he never let her visit a doctor alone near the end. The way he insisted that weakness made women imagine enemies. Each memory returned like a thorn pushing through skin. One afternoon, while she sat beneath the mango tree behind the eatery, Mama Ifeoma came and placed a basket of peppers beside her. "You will sort these." Nkiru looked at the basket, then at her. "I thought I was resting." "You are. Rest does not always mean sleeping." Nkiru almost smiled. "So this is your kindness. This is my wisdom. Women heal faster when their hands remember purpose." They sat in silence for a while, sorting red from green, spoiled from good. The afternoon air was warm and dusty. Beyond the yard, children chased a punctured football through the lane. Somewhere a radio crackled with high-life music. It was an ordinary village day, the kind of day that used to pass unnoticed. But for Nkiru, even ordinary things had become sacred. The smell of pepper, the sound of laughter, the feel of shade. 5 weeks earlier, she had been lying in mud on the roadside, waiting to disappear. Now she was holding food in her hands. That should have felt like enough. But pain had a habit of asking questions peace could not yet answer. "Mama," she said quietly. "Why did God let me live, Mama?" Ifeoma did not answer at once. She rarely wasted holy words on easy comfort. "At my age," she said finally, "I have stopped pretending I know why God does one thing and not another. But I know this: when evil fails to finish its work, it becomes frightened. That may be reason enough." Nkiru lowered her eyes. "Sometimes I think I should have died that night." Mama Ifeoma's hands stopped moving. "No." The word came so sharply that Nkiru looked up. The older woman stared at her with fierce, almost offended intensity. "Do not speak like that again. Death is not proof that pain was real, and survival is not proof that pain was small. You lived because your story was not over. That is all you need to know for now." The peppers remained between them, bright as small warnings. Nkiru nodded. She did not say it aloud, but part of her still wondered whether survival had only given sorrow more time to find her. A week later, Dr. Akin arrived. He was not from the village clinic. He was a physician from a mission hospital 2 towns away. A calm, observant man in his 40s with kind eyes and the habit of listening fully before speaking. Toby had sent word after becoming increasingly uneasy about Nkiru's symptoms. Mama Ifeoma trusted Toby's instincts, so when Dr. Akeni stepped into the yard with a leather case in one hand and dust on his shoes, she greeted him with rare respect. He examined Nkiru in the back room, while Mama Ifeoma hovered near the door like a guard who had disguised herself as a cook. Dr. Akin asked careful questions about the tablets she had been taking, about her appetite, about sleep, about pain, about bleeding, about the months before she was abandoned. Nkiru answered as best she could, though some details remained blurred, as if memory itself had been drugged. At last he sat back. "You were severely weakened," he said. "That much is clear. Malnutrition, untreated infection, prolonged stress. But there are also signs that your body was being affected by substances it should not have been taking regularly." Nkiru went still. Even Mama Ifeoma's breath seemed to pause. "You mean poison," Mama Ifeoma said bluntly. Dr. Akane chose his words more carefully. I mean, medicine can be misused. A sleeping tablet at the wrong frequency. A painkiller in harmful amounts. Sedatives given without supervision. Some combinations can slowly destroy strength, while leaving just enough function for a person to seem merely ill. Nkiru's mouth went dry. She remembered the bottles, the bitter aftertaste, the drowsiness that never felt like rest, the way Obinna would stand over her and say, "Take it, unless you want to get worse." Doctor. Akane watched her face and knew memory had just found another door. There is more, he said quietly. Your body also shows signs of a past trauma that may have involved pregnancy loss. The room tilted. Not physically this time. Spiritually. Nkiru stared at him. What did you say? He did not flinch. I cannot tell the full history from examination alone, but there are indications. If you were ever pregnant, and if something happened. Yes, she whispered. Then stopped. The word left her before she meant to speak it. Mama. Ifeoma turned sharply toward her. Dr. Akane's expression softened, but he did not interrupt. Nkiru's hands closed around the edge of the bed. I thought, she swallowed hard. I thought maybe I imagined it. No one spoke. Tears gathered slowly, unwillingly in her eyes. There was a time, she said, just before I became very weak. I missed my monthly bleeding. I felt different, tired but not like sickness, heavy in a strange way. I told Obinna. He acted surprised, then pleased. Or maybe he only performed pleased. I don't know anymore. Her voice cracked. A week later he brought new tablets. Said the doctor wanted to strengthen me. Mama, Ifeoma's face hardened into something dangerous. What happened after cramping? Nkiru pressed a hand to her lower stomach unconsciously. Bleeding. So much bleeding. I was frightened. I told him we had to go to a hospital. He said women panic too quickly. He said if I rested it would stop. When it didn't. Her eyes clouded with horror renewed. He said maybe it was never a child. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe my body was confused. Silence filled the room like smoke. Dr. Akane lowered his gaze for a moment, not in uncertainty but in respect for the violence of what had just been named. Nkiru's breathing became uneven. Was there a child, she asked. No physician could answer that with perfect certainty years later. But sometimes truth did not need complete records. Sometimes it stood in the body and waited to be recognized. It is possible, Dr. Akane said carefully. Very possible. Nkiru turned her face away and wept soundlessly. Not the breaking kind from before. This was quieter, older. The grief of a wound that had been denied for so long it had fossilized inside her. Mama Ifeoma sat beside her and held her shoulders while Dr. Akane packed his instruments in silence. When he finished, he gave instructions for nutrition follow-up care and stronger treatment to restore her health. Then he reached into his case and handed Mama Ifeoma a card. If she wishes to pursue any formal medical review later, he said, send word, I will help. After he left, evening came with an amber sky and the smell of frying onions drifting from the kitchen. But inside, Nkiru, nothing felt warm. That night she did not eat much. She sat on the edge of the bed holding the doctor's card while memory moved through her like a procession of ghosts. A child that might have been, tablets that had not healed, a husband who turned every question into her own guilt. By midnight she understood something new and terrible. Obinna had not merely abandoned her when she became inconvenient. He had been shaping her collapse for months. The next morning she asked Mama Ifeoma for work. Real work. Not pepper sorting, not folding cloth. Work that forced the mind forward. You are still healing, Mama Ifeoma warned. I know. Nkiru stood straighter than usual, though fatigue already shadowed her face. "That is why I need something to do before my thoughts bury me." Mama Ifeoma watched her for a moment, then nodded. So Nkiru began helping at the eatery. At first only small things. Washing cups, cutting vegetables while seated, counting loaves delivered from the bakery van, greeting customers. Then larger things, serving soup, wiping tables, keeping written records in the old ledger when Mama Ifeoma discovered that Nkiru's handwriting was elegant and precise. Numbers calmed her. Order calmed her. There was comfort in small, honest transactions. 1 bowl of rice, 1 bottle of malt. Correct change returned. No lies hidden in tenderness. No betrayal inside ordinary work. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Strength returned with routine. Her cheeks slowly filled. The hollowness beneath her eyes softened. Her steps steadied. She began braiding her hair again instead of leaving it hidden under scarves. Sometimes she even laughed with Ngozi in the kitchen when customers made ridiculous demands. The village changed its opinion of her, as villagers often do when a broken woman refuses to remain broken. They stopped calling her the roadside wife. They started calling her Sister Nkiru. That amused Mama Ifeoma greatly. Yet healing did not mean forgetting. The land document remained wrapped in cloth and hidden in Mama Ifeoma's locked box. Dr. Ekene visited when he could, always respectful, always measured. And one market day he brought someone with him. A woman in a navy skirt suit with intelligent eyes and the quiet authority of someone who did not need to raise her voice to be obeyed. "This Dr. Ekene said is Barrister Adaeze." The woman extended her hand to Nkiru. "I have heard enough to know 2 things. First, somebody worked very hard to erase you. Second, they did not finish the job." Nkiru took her hand. Barrister Adaeze's grip was firm, grounded, real. "And now?" Nkiru asked. Adaeze glanced toward the locked box where the paper slept, then back at her. "Now," she said, "we begin the slower kind of recovery." Nkiru frowned faintly. The legal kind. A chill passed through her, not from fear alone, from recognition. The body had been the first battlefield. The truth would be the next. By the time night fell, Nkiru stood alone for a moment outside the eatery, looking at the road beyond the village. Months earlier she had arrived on the edge of death, nameless, shaking, almost erased. Now she was still wounded, yes, still grieving, still learning how to live inside a body and a history that had both been violated. But there was something else in her now. Not revenge. Not yet. Something cleaner. Something steadier. Direction sharpened by dignity. Somewhere in the city Obinna still believed time had buried what he did. He did not know that Nkiru could now stand for hours without falling. He did not know that a doctor had begun connecting the pieces. He did not know that a lawyer had entered the story. And he did not know that the woman he abandoned had stopped asking whether she would survive. She had moved on to a far more dangerous question. How much of herself could she reclaim? 5 years changed a face. They changed a voice. They changed the way a person entered a room, but they did not always change the eyes. That was why Obinna froze. The ballroom of the Ise Grand Hotel shimmered with chandeliers' polished glass, and the low murmur of wealthy people pretending generosity came naturally to them. Men in tailored suits traded business cards with smiling caution. Women in elegant dresses discussed charity with the relaxed confidence of those who had never needed it to survive. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays and disciplined expressions. Obinna belonged there. At least that was what he had spent years forcing the world to believe. He stood near the back of the hall, one hand wrapped around a glass he had barely touched the other, adjusting the cuff of his jacket every few minutes in a habit that appeared refined from a distance, but revealed nerves up close. He had come to the event because he needed something. A deal, an introduction, a new alliance. His construction business had once expanded quickly, too quickly on borrowed shine and borrowed money. Now creditors had become impatient, investors had become cold, and the kind of men who used to laugh at his jokes had started letting his calls ring unanswered. So he came where desperate men in polished shoes often came, to charity events, because the rich liked to rescue the poor in public and business opportunities often hid inside applause. The evening's host, a media personality with a dazzling smile and no talent for sincerity, stepped onto the stage to introduce the keynote speaker for the Foundation's new Women's Recovery Initiative. Obinna only half listened. He was scanning faces in the VIP row, measuring who might still find him useful. Then the host said a name. Please welcome the founder of the Rising Daughters Sanctuary, Ms. Nkiru Ezeanyi. The glass nearly slipped from Obinna's hand. At first he thought it had to be someone else. Another Nkiru, another woman with that name, and that posture, and that impossible calm. But then she stepped into the light, and the blood left his face. She was alive. Not barely alive. Alive in the most offensive way possible. Whole, elegant, composed. The woman walking across that stage in a deep emerald dress, with her head high and her shoulders steady, bore almost no resemblance to the feverish body he had left on the roadside 5 years earlier. Her face was fuller now, sculpted by health instead of suffering. Her hair was wrapped in a regal jailer that made her seem taller than everyone around her. There was no shaking in her hands, no confusion in her eyes, no pleading softness, only stillness and power. The room applauded. Obinna did not. He could not. He stared as if his past had risen from a grave and learned how to speak. Nkiru reached the podium and let the applause settle. When she began, her voice carried across the ballroom with quiet authority. 5 years ago, she said, I learned how quickly a human life can be discarded when it becomes inconvenient. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. Obinna's fingers tightened around the glass until his knuckles whitened. Nkiru continued, not with the trembling bitterness of a victim, but with the measured force of someone who had survived long enough to become dangerous to lies. Tonight is not about my pain. It is about what pain reveals. It reveals who profits from silence, who turns away, who watches suffering and calls it private family business. And it also reveals something else, how one act of mercy can interrupt generations of cruelty. A screen behind her lit up with photographs, not of herself, of women. Women smiling awkwardly beside sewing machines, women holding babies on their hips, women in classroom uniforms, women standing in front of a newly painted shelter with tears in their eyes and dignity in their posture. Rising Daughters Sanctuary. Obinna read the words at the bottom of the screen as though they were written in fire. The camera panned across the audience on the side monitors. People were listening. Really listening. A senator's wife sat in the front row, nodding solemnly. 2 major donors leaned toward each other with approving expressions. A respected bishop looked moved. This was not some small village project hidden in obscurity. Nkiru had built something large enough to attract power, and power Obinna knew could protect. The realization punched through him harder than shock. He had not only failed to erase her, he had allowed her to rise beyond his reach. A memory flashed without warning. Rain on the windshield. His own breath fast and hot. Nkiru's voice behind him pleading. He had told himself she would not survive the night. He had needed to believe it, because if she survived, then time itself might one day return carrying her face. And now it had. When the speech ended, the ballroom rose in a standing ovation. Obina remained still for 2 extra seconds before forcing himself upright, clapping with everyone else, his mouth set in something like admiration. He had spent years mastering expressions that hid rot. He used one now. Inside, panic was moving fast. He did not hear much of the rest of the program. He watched her instead. How people approached her after she stepped down from the stage. How they smiled at her. How they waited for her attention. How she listened without shrinking. A businessman he had been trying to meet for months greeted her warmly. A television host asked for an interview. A state commissioner touched her arm with respect. Each small interaction tightened the knot in Obina's chest. Then came the worst moment. Nkiru turned slightly while speaking to an older woman, and her eyes swept the room. They landed on him. Everything inside him went cold. No dramatic gasp. No visible stumble. But she saw him. He knew it because her gaze stopped for the briefest fraction of a second. Just enough. Not long enough for others to notice. Long enough for him to understand that the dead woman on the roadside had not only lived. She remembered. Then she looked away. That look was worse than hatred. Hatred would have meant he still occupied her emotions. This was recognition without surrender. He suddenly needed air. Obina left the ballroom through a side corridor, moving with the quick, contained pace of a man trying not to look as though he was running from his own sins. The restroom mirror showed a face he hated instantly. Sweat at the temples, eyes too wide, skin dull under expensive lighting. He turned on the tap and splashed water on his wrists. Think. He had survived worse situations than this. Hadn't he? No. Not like this. Debt could be negotiated, investors could be deceived, rumors could be redirected. But a living witness with status money and public admiration, that was different. That was a threat. And beneath the fear, another instinct began lifting its head. The older instinct. The one that had ruined him long before this night. Calculation. If Nkiru was publicly successful, then perhaps she had resources. Influence. Access. If she had any legal claim to property or inheritance that had not yet been fully contested, perhaps he could still maneuver. Not by force now. That would be foolish. By remorse. By narrative. By performance. He stared at himself in the mirror and slowly adjusted his collar again. Yes, if she had risen this high, she would also care about image. About appearances, about moral authority. Women like that often wanted closure. They wanted explanations. They wanted public proof that they were good enough to forgive. He knew how to use that. By the time he returned to the ballroom, his face had calmed. His mind had not, but he no longer needed calm inside. Only outside. The crowd had shifted into reception mode now. Music floated softly from hidden speakers. Waiters circulated with appetizers. Guests formed clusters around important people, like moths around flame. Obina moved strategically, nodding to acquaintances, smiling when necessary, but all the while edging closer to where Nkiru stood, with 2 donors and a television journalist. He studied her the way one studies a changed landscape after a flood, searching for familiar paths that might still exist. When the journalist finally stepped away, he approached. Up close, the transformation was even more disorienting. She smelled faintly of jasmine and clean linen. Her jewelry was elegant, without screaming for attention. Her face held maturity now, but not hardness. That made her more powerful, not less. For a moment, words deserted him. Nkiru looked at him steadily. "Obina," she said. His name in her mouth sounded like a verdict. He gave a soft, incredulous laugh, carefully measured. "Nkiru, I hardly know what to say." "That makes 2 of us," she replied. No tremor, no tears, just calm. He lowered his voice. "I thought you were dead," she said. The word cut through the music between them. A passing guest glanced over, then moved on. Obinna forced sorrow into his face. No, I mean, gone. I searched for you. It was an absurd lie, and he knew it even as he spoke it. But old habits rarely cared about dignity. Nkiru's eyes did not change. Did you? There was enough in those 2 words to make his throat tighten. He leaned closer, performing pain now, letting remorse soften his features. Nkiru, I have lived with regret for years. You don't know what that period of my life was like. I was under pressure. I was not myself. I made terrible choices. There it was. Not confession. Weather. Pressure. Circumstances. The language of cowards who wanted sin to sound like an accident. Nkiru folded her hands in front of her. And yet you seem to have survived being not yourself. Very well. He swallowed. She had changed too much to be handled with cheap tenderness. He adjusted course. You look well, he said quietly. Better than well. I am honestly grateful. That almost made her smile. Almost. You're grateful I lived? Yes. She tilted her head. Interesting, because 5 years ago you did not behave like a man hoping for that outcome. The blood pounded in his ears. He glanced around, suddenly aware of how public the room was. This isn't the place. No, Nkiru said. It isn't. For 1 second he thought she was dismissing him. Then she reached into a small clutch bag, removed a card and handed it to him. Not a personal number. A foundation card. Rising Daughters Sanctuary. Office contact details. Formal. Controlled. Cold. If you have something truthful to say, she said, request an appointment. Before he could answer, an older woman in a gold wrapper approached and embraced Nkiru warmly. The moment was over. Nkiru turned away from him with graceful finality and began speaking to the woman beside her. Obinna stood there holding the card like a summons. He should have left then. Instead, he watched. He watched Nkiru move through the rest of the evening like someone fully at home in her own life. He watched respected people seek her out. He watched photographers take pictures she did not pose desperately for. He watched power recognize her. And with every passing minute, fear mixed with something uglier. Not guilt. Not really. Envy. How dare she rise higher after what had happened? How dare the woman he discarded become untouchable, while he who had once controlled every step of her world now stood on the edge of decline? By the time he drove home that night, the city lights blurred past his windshield in long, nervous streaks. The card lay on the passenger seat. At a red light, he picked it up again. Rising Daughters Sanctuary. Founder Nkiru Ezeani. His jaw clenched. He remembered the land document, not because he had seen it recently, but because he had spent years telling himself it was either destroyed or inaccessible. If Nkiru had resurfaced this powerfully, what else had resurfaced with her? When he got home, his apartment felt too quiet. He poured himself a drink he did not need, and stood by the window staring out at a city that had begun slipping from his control. His phone buzzed twice with ignored business messages. Then it buzzed a 3rd time. A message. From a number he had not seen in years. Lillian. His stomach tightened before he even opened it. He read the words once. Then again. I heard your wife is alive. We need to talk before she decides to remember everything. For the first time that night, the glass in his hand actually shook. Because Nkiru's return was not just a ghost from the past. It was a door. And behind that door stood every lie he had buried. With help from the one person who knew exactly how deep the rot went. Obinna did not answer Lillian's message that night. He read it 4 times, locked his phone, unlocked it again, and reread it as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less threatening. They did not. I heard your wife is alive. We need to talk before she decides to remember everything. Not if. Before. That single word stayed with him longer than the others. He slept badly in fragments. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw Nkiru on the stage in emerald silk, alive in the most humiliating way possible. Then the image shifted, and he saw her again in the rain, her hand on the car door, her mouth moving with weak, desperate pleading. In the dream, both versions of her looked at him at once. By morning his neck ached, and his shirt stuck slightly to his back. He hated feeling hunted, so he did what men like him always did when fear entered the room. He reached for control. At 10:30 he called the number on the Rising Daughters Sanctuary card. A receptionist answered with professional warmth. Obinna softened his voice, introduced himself carefully, and said he was an old acquaintance of Ms. Nkiru Ezeanyi, who wished to speak with her privately about a sensitive personal matter. The woman on the line did not react. "Do you have a subject for the meeting request, sir?" He paused for half a second. "Reconciliation," he said. Even to his own ears it sounded noble. The receptionist told him she would pass along the message. By noon he had changed his mind 3 times about whether he should meet Lillian first. By 1, she made the decision for him. She called. Obinna stared at the name until the ringing nearly stopped, then answered without greeting. "What do you want?" Lillian laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Still arrogant, even now. "Say what you called to say." "I called because you are slow when you panic." Her voice was smooth, expensive, and edged with contempt. "Nkiru is alive. She is visible. She has influence. And you are still standing around pretending your main problem is image." Obinna moved into the sitting room and shut the door, though there was no one else in the apartment. "My main problem," he said through his teeth, "is that you are calling me after years of silence like I owe you anything." "You owe me several things," Lillian replied, "but today I only want one. A conversation. I'm busy. That would be more convincing if your business weren't collapsing." His jaw tightened. Lillian knew where to cut. She had always known. Where he asked. Same place as before, she said. Blue Lantern Cafe. 2 o'clock. Then she hung up. Obinna arrived 6 minutes late on purpose. He still believed in small displays of control, even when larger ones had already slipped from his hands. The Blue Lantern Cafe sat behind a petrol station off a busy road, pretending to be discreet while feeding mostly on secrecy. Businessmen met women they did not introduce to their wives there. Local contractors made side deals over pepper soup there. Politicians sent assistants instead of appearing in person. It smelled of coffee diesel and hidden intentions. Lillian was already seated in a booth at the back. She had aged well, though age was not the first thing people noticed about her. They noticed precision, her makeup precise, her posture precise, her smile precise. Even her anger, when it came, arrived carefully aimed. She wore a cream blouse, dark glasses pushed up on her head, and the expression of a woman who had long stopped wasting tenderness on the undeserving. Obinna slid into the seat opposite her. "You look tired," she said. "You look intrusive." "Good. We're both honest today." A waiter approached. Obinna waved him away. Lillian kept stirring a cup of tea she was no longer drinking. For a few seconds neither spoke. Then Lillian said, "Did you really think she died?" Obinna looked at her coldly. "I had reason to believe she wouldn't survive." "That's not what I asked." He said nothing. Lillian studied him over the rim of her cup. "You always did this. You answer with wording instead of truth. And you always enjoyed drama." Her smile sharpened. "No, Obinna. I enjoyed profit. You brought the drama." That hit closer than he wanted. 5 years earlier, Lillian had not merely been his lover. She had been his co-conspirator in 1,000 quiet moral failures, financial lies, fake invoices, planted stories, manipulations so routine they stopped feeling like sins and started feeling like strategy. But even among the dirtier corners of their history, the Nkiru matter had stood apart. Lillian leaned back. So, tell me how frightened you are. I am not frightened. Then you're a fool. He looked away toward the front window where motorcycles buzzed past in the sun. What exactly do you think she knows? Lillian let the spoon rest inside the cup. Enough. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one. Enough to destroy whatever is left of your reputation, and enough to drag anyone attached to the old story into it. His eyes snapped back to her. Anyone attached? She gave him a flat stare. Did you imagine I was talking about a stranger? There it was, the reason for the meeting. Not concern for him, self-preservation. Obinna lowered his voice. No one can prove anything from 5 years ago. Lillian laughed again, but this time it carried actual disbelief. That is the sentence men say right before proof starts walking toward them in heels. He hated when she spoke like that, half mockery, half prophecy. He folded his hands on the table. You were not there that night. No, she said. I was useful before the night. Which may be worse. The space between them thickened. A waitress crossed the cafe with a tray. At another table, a man burst into laughter over something on his phone. Life continued around them with offensive normalcy. Lillian lowered her voice. She may not know every detail yet. But if she starts digging properly, the pieces connect. The medication, the inheritance, the timing, the pregnancy. She watched his face when she said the last word, and she saw enough. Yes, I thought that would still wound. Obinna's throat worked once. You talk too much, and you talked too little when it mattered. She leaned forward. Do you know what your mistake was, not abandoning her? Men like you do monstrous things every day and still manage to keep moving. Your mistake was contempt. You truly believed she was too broken to return. His fingers curled into his palm beneath the table. He wanted to say she was wrong, but she wasn't. For years he had built his peace on the assumption that Nkiru's absence was permanent, not just physical absence, narrative absence, moral absence. No witness, no voice, no threat. Now the witness had a microphone. He exhaled sharply. What do you want from me? At last, Lillian said. A useful question? She took a folded envelope from her handbag and placed it on the table between them. He did not touch it. What is that? A copy of a prescription trail? She tapped the envelope lightly. Not enough to convict anyone by itself, but enough to interest a careful lawyer. Dates, purchases, refill patterns, names that shouldn't have been involved. Obinna stared at it. His chest tightened. You kept this. I keep many things. Why? Because, unlike you, I never confuse greed with trust. He looked at her with naked disgust now. You blackmail even your allies. Lillian's expression did not change. Alice Obinna, you stopped being my ally the day you decided panic was a plan. You dragged me into a mess, then vanished into your marriage performance and your business games while I cleaned up what could be cleaned. He almost laughed at the hypocrisy of hearing this from her, but the envelope held his attention too strongly. What do you want? He asked again. This time, distance. Protection, insurance. She folded her hands. If Nkiru's people come near me, I need to know exactly what story you plan to tell, because I will not go down to protect your pride. He sat back slowly. Now the shape was clear. Lillian was no longer on his side. She was negotiating the terms of her betrayal. He should have expected it. A woman who helped him deceive another woman out of money and dignity was never going to be loyal in the moral sense, only in the transactional one. And the transaction had ended years ago. His voice cooled. I have requested a meeting with Nkiru. For the first time, Lillian looked genuinely surprised. Already? Yes. And what will you do? Cry. Blame stress, say you were confused. Men like you always think regret is a performance costume you can wear when consequences arrive. I know how to speak to her. Lillian's eyes turned almost pitying, which he found more offensive than contempt. No, you knew how to speak to the old Nkiru, the one who still thought love meant patience, the one who mistook silence for peace. The woman on that stage last night is not the woman you starved, drugged, and abandoned. He leaned across the table, voice low and dangerous. Be careful. She did not retreat an inch. Or what? The question sat there, merciless. Because threats required leverage. And his leverage was shrinking. Lillian pushed the envelope a little closer. Take it, read it, burn it if you like. But understand something. If she reaches me first, I will tell the truth in the version that saves me best. He took the envelope at last. It felt thin. Too thin to hold so much damage. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. A message. From an unknown number. He opened it. Mr. Obinna, this is Ada from Rising Daughters Sanctuary. Ms. Ezeanyi can see you on Thursday at 11 a.m. at our administrative office. Kindly confirm if you will attend. He stared at the screen. Lillian watched his face and understood immediately. She answered. He did not speak. Lillian smiled without warmth. Then it begins. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. No, he said. It begins when I decide what to say. But even as he spoke, he knew that was no longer true. It had begun the moment Nkiru survived the road. Everything since then had only been delay. When he left the cafe, the sun felt too bright. Traffic roared. Somewhere nearby, a preacher shouted through a cheap loudspeaker about repentance and hidden sins. The sound irritated him so much he almost laughed. Back in his car, he opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies. Dates, pharmacy stamps, a name he recognized from one of the private clinics he had used years earlier, and one handwritten note in Lillian's sharp script. You told me she would never need the truth if she was too weak to ask for it. Obinna closed his eyes. For the first time in years, a thought entered his mind, not as strategy, but as fear stripped bare. Nkiru might not merely want answers. She might already be collecting them. And if she was, then Thursday would not be a reunion. It would be a test, not of whether she still loved him, but of whether he could lie convincingly to the woman who had once trusted him most and now had every reason to watch him like an enemy. Thursday arrived with brutal sunlight, the kind that made every shadow look intentional. Obinna parked across from the Rising Daughters Sanctuary administrative office 15 minutes early and stayed inside the car for almost 10 of them, staring at the building through the windshield. It was not extravagant. That unsettled him more. He had expected something louder if Nkiru had truly become powerful. A flashy headquarters, a grand entrance, something that could be dismissed as performance. Instead, the building stood with practical dignity. Fresh cream paint, clean windows, a blue sign, security at the gate, and women moving in and out with purpose. Some wore office clothes. Some wore simple wrappers. Some carried children. Nobody looked ornamental. Nobody looked lost. This was not vanity. It was structure, and structure was harder to manipulate than image. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, stepped out and crossed the street with the measured confidence of a man determined not to look cornered. The receptionist inside recognized his name before he finished speaking. That irritated him too. Ms. Ezeanyi will see you shortly, she said. He sat in the waiting area beneath framed photographs of training workshops, school graduations, women learning trades, women smiling beside sewing machines and catering ovens and hairdressing chairs. Transformation hung on the walls like a silent accusation. It was all too clean, too sincere, too unlike the world he understood best. A young mother walked past carrying a sleeping child, and for one split second, something in Obinna's chest tightened. Not guilt, memory. Nkiru's hand over her stomach years ago, the softness in her voice on the one night she had almost smiled with unguarded hope. I think something is different, she had whispered. He had known what she meant even before she said the word, but he had not let himself hear it fully then. Now, in the waiting room of a place built from women's survival, the memory returned sharp enough to make him look away. At exactly 11:12, the receptionist rose. "Sir, this way." He followed her down a corridor lined with offices and muted conversation. At the end was a conference room with glass panels and drawn blinds. The receptionist opened the door. Nkiru was already inside. She stood near the head of the table in a simple navy dress, no stage lights. This time, no emerald silk, no jeweled head wrap, yet somehow she looked even more formidable. Beside her sat Barrister Adaeze with a file folder and an unreadable face. On the other side of the table was Dr. Ekene, calm as ever, hands folded. Obinna stopped at the threshold. He had expected a private conversation. Not witnesses, not records, not order. Nkiru noticed the flicker in his expression. "You wanted to speak," she said. "This is the safest way to do that." He entered slowly. "I thought this was personal." "It is," Nkiru replied. "That is why I prefer documentation." Barrister Adaeze gestured to the chair opposite them. "Please sit." He did. The chair felt too low. The room felt too bright. For a moment no one spoke. The air conditioner hummed softly overhead. Outside the blinds, life moved in muffled shapes. Inside, the silence was not empty. It was procedural, deliberate, a silence built to let lies expose themselves. Obinna cleared his throat first. "Nkiru," he said carefully, softening his tone before anything else I need to say. "I never imagined this meeting would happen. Seeing you alive, successful, it moved me more than you know." Nkiru did not blink. Barrister Adaeze uncapped a pen. Dr. Ekene merely watched. Obinna pressed on. "I have carried shame for years." "What happened between us?" "Between us." Nkiru interrupted. He paused. Her voice remained controlled, but each word came clean and sharp. "Obinna, there is no between us. Until facts are named accurately. One person can wound another without the wound becoming mutual." The sentence landed harder than raised voices would have. He shifted slightly in his chair. "All right. What I did to you—" "Which part?" Eze asked mildly. His gaze snapped to her. She met it without warmth. Abandoning her on the roadside. Administering questionable medication. Concealing inheritance information. We should be specific. Obinna laughed once under his breath as though the suggestion were absurd. "This is exactly what I feared. I came in good faith and already I'm sitting in an ambush." "No," Nkiru said. "An ambush is when a person is lured somewhere helpless and discarded. You know something about that." That cut through him. He inhaled slowly, recalibrating. Anger would not help. Not yet. He leaned into sorrow instead, lowering his eyes, shaping himself into a man pressed down by regret. "I was overwhelmed," he said. "The business was collapsing. Debt was mounting. I was under pressure from family, from creditors, from everything. You were ill all the time, and I—" He let his voice falter. "I handled it horribly." Nkiru studied him. 5 years earlier, that trembling voice might have reopened her compassion, might have invited her to rescue him from himself. But pain once survived properly develops memory of texture. She now knew the difference between remorse and performance. One sounded broken, the other sounded rehearsed. "You handled it horribly," she repeated. "That is one way to describe leaving your wife on the road in the rain with no money, no phone, and no identification." He spread his hands. "I came back." The room went still. Not because anyone believed him, because the lie arrived too quickly, too conveniently, as if his mouth had grown impatient with strategy and lunged toward escape. Nkiru's expression did not change, but something colder entered her eyes. "You came back." "Yes," he said, seizing the path he had created. "By the time I realized how far things had gone, I turned the car around." "You were gone." "I searched." "No, you didn't," she said. 3 words. Flat. Final. He looked at her, measuring whether denial was still possible. Dr. Akin reached for a folder and slid a paper across the table toward him. A witness statement from the truck driver who found her. He estimated the timing. There was no evidence of a returning vehicle in that interval, and his route gave him clear visibility for several kilometers. Obinna did not touch the paper. Barrister Adeze opened another file. "We also have a preliminary timeline of your phone activity that night. Calls made. Location estimates. One particularly interesting call placed 12 minutes after Nkiru was abandoned. His pulse kicked. He kept his face controlled, but not perfectly. Nkiru saw that. "What was the call about?" she asked. He looked at her. "You're building a story out of fragments." "No," she said quietly. "I am recovering the story you tried to bury." Silence again. Then Adeze folded her hands over the file. "Let us try a more direct route. When Nkiru was under your care, what medications were you giving her? Whatever the doctors prescribed." "Name them." "I don't remember." "Interesting," Adeze said. "Because some pharmacy records suggest repeated purchase of sedatives and other drugs inconsistent with ordinary home treatment for weakness." His mouth tightened. He should never have come. Yet leaving now would look worse. He knew that too. "I was following advice," he said, "whose Dr. Akane asked." Another pause. That was when Nkiru leaned forward slightly, not enough to threaten, just enough to make the moment intimate. "Obinna," she said, "for 5 years I kept asking myself one question. Did you abandon me because you were afraid? Or because by then you had already decided I was worth more to you dying than living?" He looked at her. There it was, the real question. Not the roadside, not the image, not the reconciliation. His answer mattered now because it would reveal the moral shape beneath the excuses. He almost said, "How can you think that of me?" But even he knew the sentence would collapse under the weight of history. So he said nothing. Nkiru's gaze did not leave his face. "I was pregnant," she said. The words entered the room like a blade. For the first time since the meeting began, Obinna's composure genuinely slipped. Not dramatically, but enough. A tightening around the mouth, a flicker in the eyes. The smallest recoil of a man hit where he was still tender, if not morally, then tactically. Barrister Adeze watched him with professional stillness. Dr. Akane remained quiet. Nkiru went on. "I did not imagine it. I did not invent it from grief. I know now what happened to my body. I know what the bleeding meant. I know the timing. And I know you changed the medication just before it happened." Obinna found his voice at last. "You cannot prove that." It was the wrong sentence. Everyone in the room knew it. Innocent people protested pain. Guilty people often protested proof. Adaeze wrote something down. Nkiru's hands remained steady on the table. I used to think the deepest wound was that you stopped loving me. That would have been simpler. Tragic, but simple. Her voice thinned slightly, not from weakness, but from honesty pushed through scar tissue. Now I know something worse may be true. You may never have loved me at all. He looked at her, and for one moment, one fleeting, involuntary moment, something like shame moved across his face. Not enough to transform him, but enough to reveal how close the arrow had come to the bone. He masked it quickly. This is poisoning your mind, he said. People around you are filling your head because you've built a life around victimhood. The room changed temperature. Adaeze's eyes hardened. Dr. Akane sat back as if stepping away from contamination. But Nkiru became strangely calmer. That was the moment she understood she would get no truth from his conscience, only from pressure. Victimhood, she repeated. Obinna heard his own voice and knew he had stepped wrongly, but pride would not let him retreat gracefully now. You have made your suffering your identity. You built an organization, a reputation, a whole public image around what happened. Maybe you need me to stay monstrous. A lesser woman might have shattered. The old Nkiru might have. This Nkiru only held his gaze until his aggression began sounding like confession in disguise. Then she said, "Thank you." He frowned. For what? For reminding me why forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same. She stood. The meeting was over, and the power of ending it belonged entirely to her. Obinna stood too, alarm rising beneath anger. "That's it, you drag me in here, accuse me, then dismiss me." "No, Adaeze," said also rising. "We invited you to speak." "You did. And what exactly do you think you have?" Nkiru answered before Adaeze could. "Not enough yet," she said. "But more than yesterday." The bluntness of that struck him harder than any threat. She was not bluffing triumph. She was stating progress. Obinna stepped around the chair. "Nkiru, listen to me carefully. There are things you don't understand. Things other people have twisted." "Lillian." He stopped. Too late. Too late by half a second, because he had not intended to say the name. And once it entered the room, everyone heard the crack. Adaeze's pen stopped moving. Dr. Ekene lifted his eyes. Nkiru went very still. "Lillian," she said softly. Obinna's mouth opened, then closed. He had just confirmed something none of them were sure she knew. And from the sudden change in Nkiru's face, he realized it. The silence that followed was merciless, not loud, not theatrical, just final in a new way. Because now there was another door, another witness, another thread linking medication collapse and betrayal. Nkiru took one slow breath, then another. When she spoke again, her voice was almost gentle, which made it more devastating. So there was someone else in the story. Obinna said nothing. He could not. He had moved from denial to exposure in less than an hour. Nkiru nodded once, mostly to herself. "I wondered for years why cruelty in my marriage always felt coordinated." Her eyes held his now with terrible clarity. "Thank you for clearing that up." He took a step toward her. "Nkiru, do not say my name as if it still belongs safely in your mouth." The sentence stopped him where he stood. Adaeze moved to the door and opened it. "If counsel is needed in the future, it will happen formally," she said. "Today is finished." Obinna looked from Adaeze to Dr. Ekene to Nkiru. No one here feared him. No one here needed him. Worse, no one here was confused by him anymore. That more than accusation undid him. He left without another word. Outside, sunlight struck his face like punishment. He walked past the women in the courtyard without seeing them. clearly got into his car, slammed the door, and gripped the steering wheel so hard his hands hurt. Inside the building, Nkiru remained standing for several seconds after he was gone. Not because she was weak, because the room had just shifted beneath her. Lillian. A woman's name sitting inside 5 years of illness, gaslighting, loss, and abandonment. Dr. Akini rose first. "Are you all right?" Nkiru exhaled through her nose. "No," she said, "but I am clearer." Adayeze closed the file carefully. "That was significant." "Yes." Nkiru's voice dropped lower. "And now the worst part is not that there was another woman. It's that she may know exactly what happened to my child." The word child hung there, fragile and immense. Her hands trembled then, just once. Not from fear of Obinna anymore. From proximity to a deeper truth. Because if Lillian was part of it, then the loss was not only marital betrayal. It was conspiracy, calculation, a cruelty carried out with witnesses and coordination. Nkiru turned toward the window blinds, seeing nothing through them and everything at once. 5 years ago, she had begged for a hospital. Today, she had watched the man who abandoned her accidentally lead her to the next truth. The pain in her chest was old, but the direction inside it had sharpened. Now she knew where to look next. Lillian did not expect the car outside her apartment. Not at first. She saw the black sedan from her balcony on a Sunday afternoon and assumed it belonged to one of the neighbors in the building opposite. But when she came down an hour later in dark glasses and a fitted wine-colored blouse, the same car was still there. Engine off, windows tinted, patient. Her steps slowed. The city around her remained loud and ordinary hawkers calling, buses coughing smoke music, spilling from a bar 2 streets away. But something in the stillness of that parked car made the noise feel far away. Then the rear door opened. Barrister Adayeze stepped out. Lillian stopped walking. Not dramatically, just enough for the truth to reach her before anyone spoke. So, it had come sooner than she hoped. Adayeze closed the door and adjusted the strap of her leather bag. She wore no threat on her face. That made her more dangerous. People who needed to frighten you were often weaker than they wanted to seem. People who arrived calm usually believed time was already working for them. "Ms. Lillian Okafor Adayeze asked." Lillian removed her glasses slowly. "Depends who is asking." "A lawyer representing Ms. Nkiru Ezeanyi." For a split second, annoyance flashed through Lillian before she smoothed it away. "You came to my home, I came to offer you the chance to speak before someone else decides the terms of your silence." That was elegant. Annoyingly elegant. Lillian folded her arms. "I don't discuss private matters on the street." Adayeze nodded toward a small cafe across the road. "Then let's not." 10 minutes later, they sat at a corner table near a lazily spinning fan. The cafe was half empty. A football match played on mute above the counter. 2 university students argued over lecture notes near the window. The smell of coffee and fried dough floated between them. Lillian did not touch the menu. "What exactly do you think I know?" she asked. Adayeze placed a slim file on the table but did not open it. "Enough to matter. That is not an answer. It is the only answer available until you decide whether you prefer honesty or legal pressure." Lillian let out a short breath through her nose. "You lawyers love stagecraft." Adayeze's mouth almost smiled. "Only when truth needs help entering the room." Lillian leaned back. This was already worse than dealing with Obinna. He could be baited. He could be insulted into carelessness. He mistook manipulation for strength. Adayeze, by contrast, had no vanity visible enough to use. She simply sat there with disciplined patience, like someone fully prepared to let another person ruin herself through hesitation. "What do you want?" Lillian asked. "A statement. A truthful one." "And if I refuse?" Adayeze opened the file at last. Inside were photocopies, not all of them familiar. Some clearly came from places Lillian had not expected anyone to reach. Pharmacy logs, a partial clinic ledger, a call summary, and one page with her own name highlighted beside an account transfer she had once believed safely buried in noise. Her throat tightened, but her face stayed cool. "You've been busy," No, Adayeze said. "Merely thorough." Lillian looked at the papers without touching them. "This proves nothing by itself." "True." Adayeze tapped the stack lightly. "But evidence becomes more interesting when it develops relationships. Dates speak to one another. Payments speak to prescriptions. Phone activity speaks to coordinated behavior. People start aligning whether they want to or not." Lillian lifted her gaze. "And where exactly do I fit in your lovely alignment?" "That Adayeze said depends on whether you are a witness, a participant, or both." Silence settled between them. Outside, a motorcycle backfired. The students laughed too loudly over something one of them had written. The world remained offensively ordinary, while old sins sat down for tea. Lillian looked back at the file. Then at Adayeze. "If I talk," she said, "what happens to me?" There it was. Not innocence, not outrage, self-preservation. Adayeze had expected nothing else. "That depends on what you say, how complete it is, and whether it can be corroborated. I am not here to make promises I cannot control. I am here to tell you something simple. Obinna has already begun protecting himself badly, and badly protected men are dangerous to everyone around them." Lillian's eyes sharpened. "He spoke to you." "He spoke enough." That meant yes and no at once, and Lillian understood the tactic. She lowered her voice. "He always assumed he could out-talk consequences." And you, Lillian, gave a dry, humorless laugh. "I assumed I could outdistance them." Adayeze closed the file. "You had a relationship with Obinna during his marriage to Nkiru. It was not phrased as a question." Lillian looked away briefly, then back. "Yes. You were aware Nkiru was becoming physically weaker over time." "Yes. You were aware of discussions involving property connected to her late father." Lillian's jaw tightened. "I heard things." Adayeze waited. The fan turned overhead. Finally, Lillian said, "Yes. Were you involved in obtaining medication used on Nkiru?" Lillian's fingers curled around the edge of the table. There it was, the threshold. One answer could still keep her mostly human in the story. Another would drag her fully into the machinery of cruelty. "I collected some prescriptions," she said carefully, "for whom Obinna said it was for his wife." "And you believed him?" Lillian almost smiled again, but the expression broke halfway. "Belief is too noble a word." Adayeze did not spare her. "So you knew the situation was questionable." "I knew he was desperate. That is not the same as innocent." Lillian looked toward the muted football screen, where men in bright jerseys chased a ball under stadium lights, unaware that two women below were picking through the remains of another woman's life. "I didn't plan the marriage," she said quietly. "I didn't tell him to court her. That started before me. Continue." He talked about her family land before he talked about loving her. At first it sounded like gossip, then opportunity. He said the papers were disorganized, that the family was divided, that if he stayed close enough he could help manage things when the time came. Her mouth twisted. Obinna always used business language when he meant theft. Adayeze listened without interruption. Lillian exhaled. After they married, he became frustrated. He thought Nkiru either knew more than she admitted or had hidden access to copies of something. He said she was too quiet to trust. That sentence Adayeze knew belonged to a certain type of man, the kind who interpreted gentleness as concealment, because he himself never approached anyone without motive. "What was your role?" Adayeze asked. Lillian stared at her untouched cup. At first encouragement, advice, numbers. I handled money for some of his side dealings then. He trusted me more than he trusted anyone because I never asked him to be better. The honesty of that was ugly but useful. And later Lillian swallowed once. Later he said Nkiru had become difficult, suspicious, emotional. He wanted her calmer, easier to manage. He got one doctor to prescribe mild sedatives once. After that, he started sourcing things through other channels. Sleep medication, pain medication, things to keep her weak, drowsy dependent. Adaeze's eyes did not widen, but something cold deepened behind them. And you obtained these, some of them, for payment, for loyalty. Lillian met her gaze. Do not mistake me. I was not some innocent errand girl. I knew enough to stop. I did not stop. The cafe seemed quieter now, though perhaps it was only that truth had begun taking up more space than ambient sound. Adaeze asked the next question with deliberate care. What about the pregnancy? Lillian's face changed. That was all Adaeze needed to know before the answer came. Not whether there was pain, people like Lillian could feel pain selectively, but whether memory lived near guilt. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, Lillian said. There it was. Not denial, not surprise. A confession disguised as regret. Adaeze kept her voice even. Explain. Lillian looked down at her hands. Perfect nails. A small ring. Controlled fingers now gone still. Nkiru suspected she was pregnant before he told me. He called me angry, not happy. Angry. Said a child would complicate everything. Make her more emotionally attached. Harder to move. Harder to pressure. He was terrified that if she gained stability, she would start asking for old family documents again. Adaeze said nothing. Lillian continued, but slower now, as if every word had to drag itself past resistance. He asked for stronger tablets. I told him it was reckless. He said reckless was cheaper than losing millions. Her voice thinned. I helped him get them anyway. The student laughter near the window seemed suddenly obscene. Adaeze's hands remained folded, but inside fury moved with disciplined force. Did you know what the medication might do? Yes. Did he? Yes. The air changed again. That was the center. Knowledge. Not accident, not confusion, not unfortunate side effects. Knowledge. Lillian closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. When the bleeding started, he panicked. Not because she was in danger, because he thought it would bring hospital's records questions. He kept saying, "Not now, not now," as if timing were the tragedy. And after he said she became easier to control for a while. Then more unstable, weaker, sadder, suspicious sometimes, but too tired to pursue anything properly. He began talking about her as if she were already halfway gone. Adaeze let that sit. Some statements deserved silence after them. When did abandonment become part of the plan, she asked at last. Lillian shook her head. He never said plan. Men like him prefer language that leaves them room to believe they are improvising morality away. But toward the end, when business debts worsened and Nkiru's health collapsed, he started saying things like, "If she disappears now, everything freezes in my favor until people sort themselves out." He wanted time, control, confusion. And the night itself, I wasn't there. Lillian's voice hardened a little, almost defensively. But he called after. Late. Breathless. He said, "It's done." I asked what that meant. He said she was off the board. Adaeze held her gaze. Off the board. Yes. A wife. A human being. A possible mother. Lillian flinched. For the first time since the meeting began, she looked something close to ashamed. You don't need to punish me with your eyes, she muttered. I have been doing that myself. Adayeze did not soften. That is not punishment. That is recognition. Lillian laughed once bitterly. Do you know the worst part? I told myself. She was just another woman who had chosen badly. I told myself wives always suspect mistresses of more power than they really have. I told myself men exaggerate their wives' weakness. I told myself 100 clever lies so I could keep cashing the next favor. Her throat worked. Then I saw her photo at that charity event. Alive, standing straight. And I understood something I had refused to face. What Lillian looked directly at her now, that she was never weak. We made her weak. The sentence landed like stone. Adayeze sat back very slightly. This was the statement Nkiru needed, not morally complete, not spiritually redemptive, but structurally decisive. A thread strong enough to connect the medication, the pregnancy loss, the property motive, and the abandonment into one pattern of deliberate abuse. Will you repeat this formally? Adayeze asked. Lillian's face closed halfway again. Instinct pulling her back toward caution, with protections, with conditions grounded in truth, not convenience. Lillian gave a small nod. It was not noble. It was survival choosing honesty, because every lie left now carried more cost than benefit. There is one more thing, she said. Adayeze waited. Lillian reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She opened an old archive folder and turned the screen. A voice note, dated 5 years earlier. She did not play it yet. He used to send recordings when he was afraid to type, Lillian said. That night after the call, he sent this. I kept it because I never trusted him not to sacrifice me later. Why haven't you destroyed it? Lillian's smile this time was sadder than before, because some part of me knew I deserved to hear it again one day. She pressed play. Obinna's voice, younger and ragged with adrenaline, filled the small cafe table between them. She was too weak to fight me. If anyone asks, she wondered. Do you hear me? She wondered. By morning, this will be God's matter, not mine. The recording ended. The fan kept turning. Outside, traffic moved. Inside, the last argument for misunderstanding died. Adayeze looked up slowly. This changes everything, she said. Lillian locked the phone and slipped it back into her bag. No, she replied, staring at the table. It only reveals what everything already was. By evening, when Adayeze returned to the sanctuary, Nkiru was in her office reviewing program budgets with a concentration that made people forget how much pain had taught her to focus. She looked up when Adayeze entered and understood immediately from the lawyer's face that the day had not been ordinary. Adayeze closed the door. Then she set the file on the desk. We have her, she said. Nkiru went still. Not from triumph, from impact. Adayeze's voice lowered. And Nkiru, there is proof, not just of betrayal, of intention. The room seemed to narrow. Nkiru's fingers slowly released the pen in her hand. For years she had carried grief like a fog, dense, suffocating, shapeless. Now the fog was thinning. What lay beneath it was uglier than sorrow. It was design. And once pain reveals design, justice stops being a wish. It becomes a direction. The day of the hearing began before sunrise. Nkiru was already awake when the first light touched the curtains in her room. She had not slept much, not because she was afraid of seeing Obinna again, but because truth, when it finally approaches the center of a wound, does not let the body rest easily. It moves through the blood like a second pulse. She stood by the window with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. Outside, the city was still stretching itself into morning. A rooster cried somewhere beyond the neighboring wall. A bus groaned alive in the distance. The sky was pale, undecided. It looked like the kind of mourning that belonged to ordinary people with ordinary errands. Yet by the end of that day, one version of her life would be buried forever. Not the painful version. The false one. At 8, Barrister Adaeze arrived. At 8:15, Dr. Ekene came. Mama Ifeoma had travelled in the night and insisted on coming too, even though she pretended she only came because someone must make sure all of you remember to eat. Kunle arrived last, nervous in a pressed shirt that fit awkwardly across his shoulders. He had agreed to testify. He tried not to look proud of that. Failed completely. When they entered the legal chambers, the air inside felt colder than outside. Not physically, morally. Buildings where truth and lies wrestled in public always carried a different kind of weather. The hearing itself was civil, not criminal, not yet. Property fraud, inheritance, manipulation, coercive abuse, medical misconduct, damages. But everyone in the room understood that today was larger than paperwork. Today was about narrative. About whether a powerful lie could still stand once all the people it tried to scatter had been gathered into one place. Obinna sat at the far side of the room with his counsel. He wore grey. An unfortunate choice. It made him look like dust trying to imitate stone. When Nkiru entered, he looked at her immediately. Of course he did. Men like him always searched first for the face of the person they had wronged, not to repent, but to measure whether the damage had truly grown beyond control. Nkiru did not look away. That unsettled him more than anger would have, because rage still belonged partly to the past. Composure belonged to the future. The proceedings began. Documents were introduced first, land records, family transfer summaries, banking traces, medical reports, timeline charts. Barrister Adaeze built the case the way a careful mason lays stone. No dramatic leaps, no wasted flourish, just one undeniable weight after another. She showed how the land tied to Nkiru's late father had been undervalued verbally, but pursued quietly through proxies connected to Obinna's business network. She showed how Nkiru's identification and access to records diminished during the same period her health mysteriously collapsed. She showed the pattern of medication purchases. She showed the financial deterioration in Obinna's affairs during the months leading to the abandonment. Each fact by itself could have been argued. Together they began forming a wall. Obinna's lawyer tried to soften the picture. Stress, marital conflict, miscommunication, poor record-keeping. Tragic but ordinary deterioration. The kind of language respectable people used when they wanted evil to sound administrative. Then the witnesses began. Kunle went first. His voice shook for the first minute, then steadied when he saw Nkiru watching him not with pressure, but gratitude. He described the rain, the roadside, the state he found her in. Barely conscious. No bag. No documents. Bruised, fevered, frightened even in near unconsciousness. Did she appear? Adaeze asked like a woman who had chosen to wander onto the road alone. No, Kunle said more firmly now. She looked like someone had been left there to finish dying. Obinna's lawyer rose to cross-examine, trying to suggest assumption. Emotional projection, uncertainty in the dark. Kunle took the pressure badly at first, then badly for the lawyer, because simple people when telling the truth often become impossible to move once insult hardens their spine. I know what I saw, Kunle said, and I know what kind of fear is on a person's face when they are lost, and what kind is there when someone has done them wrong. Hers was the second kind. Mama Ifeoma testified next. She did not speak like a polished witness. She spoke like judgment wearing a head wrap. She described Nkiru's condition in the days after rescue. The bruises, the trembling, the automatic apologies, the way she recoiled from medicine, the handkerchief with the hidden document, the first fragments of memory, the fear around Obinna's name. When opposing counsel suggested she was merely a sympathetic rescuer who may have interpreted events through personal bias, Mama Ifeoma looked at him as though he had offered her rotten fruit. "Young man," she said, "a woman who has been broken by a husband carries a smell of fear no honest older woman confuses. I did not need imagination, I needed eyes." Even the clerk nearly smiled. Then came Dr. Eken. If Mama Ifeoma was fire, he was steel. Precise, calm, controlled. He explained the physical signs he observed when he first assessed Nkiru. Prolonged weakness, inconsistent with natural decline alone. Sedation patterns. Likelihood of medication misuse. Evidence strongly consistent with past pregnancy loss under circumstances that should have triggered urgent medical attention. Dr. Opposing counsel said, "Are you claiming with certainty that my client intentionally harmed his wife?" "No," Dr. Ikeni replied. "I am claiming that the medical picture is inconsistent with ordinary loving care. Intent belongs partly to patterns, and the pattern here is deeply concerning." Then Adayeze called Lillian. A murmur moved through the room before it was silenced. Obinna turned fully in his seat. For the first time that day, his expression lost its expensive control. Lillian entered in a dark suit, lips bare of color, face stripped of charm. She looked not transformed, but tired of performing. There was a difference. She swore to tell the truth. Then she did. Not cleanly at first. No one this compromised speaks purely in the beginning. But under Adayeze's questioning, the story opened. The affair. The inheritance conversations. Obinna's obsession with access and control. The procurement of medication. The desire to keep Nkiru weak, dependent, manageable. The panic at the pregnancy. The stronger tablets. The bleeding. The chilling phrase off the board. Obinna's lawyer objected repeatedly. Relevance. Character smear. Hearsay within hearsay. Some objections landed. Most did not stop the damage, because the core was already there. Knowledge. Coordination. Motive. When Adayeze asked, did Obinna understand the possible consequences of the medication, Lillian answered without looking at him. Yes. And when Nkiru began bleeding, he was afraid of hospitals, not for her, for himself. No one moved. No one needed to. The room itself seemed to tighten around the shape of the truth. Then came the voice note. Adayeze played it once. Obinna's younger voice filled the chamber. She was too weak to fight me. If anyone asks, she wandered. Do you hear me? She wandered. By morning this will be God's matter, not mine. Silence followed. Not the usual courtroom silence of waiting. The heavier kind. The kind that comes when a man's own mouth reaches back through time and places its hand around his throat. Obinna's lawyer rose immediately, objecting to authentication context chain of custody. Adayeze responded with prepared calm. Metadata, device continuity, supporting call records, corroborative testimony. The challenge still mattered legally, but morally, the room had already heard enough. Then, unexpectedly, Obinna himself requested to speak. His lawyer tried to stop him in a whisper, sharp enough to cut skin. Obinna stood anyway. That was how pride finally completed what evidence had begun. He began with outrage. He said he was being painted as a monster because he had once been a failing husband. He said private marital suffering was being turned into a spectacle by people who benefited from Nkiru's public image. He said grief distorted memory. He said regret was being weaponized against him. And for one dangerous second he almost sounded plausible. Then Nkiru looked at him. Not with fury, not with tears, just with that terrible steadiness. And something in him cracked under the insult of her composure. "You want the truth," he snapped, voice rising. "Fine. Yes, I was tired. Yes, I was drowning. Yes, she had become a burden I could not carry any more." The room shifted. His lawyer closed his eyes. Obinna kept going. Everything became about her weakness, her fear, her questions, her father's land, her sickness, her moods, her suspicions. Do you know what it is like to build a life while dragging someone who is always collapsing behind you? He heard himself, could not stop, or would not, because the ugliest truths often emerge not when a conscience wakes, but when ego feels cornered. Nkiru's face did not change. That somehow enraged him further. I left her there. Yes, he shouted. I left her because I had nothing left. I drove away because if I stayed, my whole life would go under with hers. The words echoed. No one needed the rest, but still he gave it, and in giving it, destroyed himself. His voice fell lower, hoarser now. I stopped the car later. He stared somewhere beyond the room, beyond the years, into the memory he had hoped to outrun. I stopped. I could have turned back. Every person in the chamber went still, but I didn't. There it was. Not a legal confession to every act. Something worse. A moral one. I sat there, he said, breathing hard, and I told myself if I went back, everything would begin again. The hospital, the cost, the questions, the crying. So I chose not to. No one interrupted him. No one dared, because in that moment punishment no longer needed creativity. It had already arrived in the shape of self-revelation. Obinna looked up, then perhaps expecting someone to understand pressure, desperation, male failure, the ordinary selfishness of frightened people. What he found instead were faces emptied of every excuse he had ever used. Kunle looked sickened. Mama Ifeoma looked ready to bury him herself. Lillian looked as though even her own guilt found him unbearable. And Nkiru looked sad. That was the final humiliation. Not hatred. Sadness. As if the man who once held her future had reduced himself into something too small, even for rage. The ruling did not come all at once that day. Some matters would proceed. Some referrals would follow. Financial recovery. Formal findings, expanded investigation, these would take time. But the collapse itself happened in real time before paperwork caught up. By evening, word had already begun to spread. Not gossip now. Record, statement, exposure. The businessman who had once helped Obinna structure side deals stopped answering his calls. 2 pending investors withdrew. A board appointment he had been pursuing quietly vanished within hours. Even the local pastor who used to praise endurance in marriage sent only one message. You need repentance, not explanation. When Nkiru stepped out of the chambers into the late afternoon light, cameras were waiting at a distance, kept back by staff and security. She did not speak to them. Not yet. This day was too raw for performance. She stood on the steps instead, breathing. The sky had turned gold. Mama Ifeoma touched her shoulder once. No words. Kunle wiped his face when he thought nobody noticed. Dr. Akane gave Adayeze a long nod that meant more than congratulations. It meant this matters. Nkiru looked toward the road. 5 years ago, a road had nearly become her grave. Now another road led away from public truth and into whatever came after justice begins. Not joy, not exactly. Justice never returned children, never erased nights, never gave back the years spent doubting one's own mind. But it did something else. It removed confusion. And confusion, she now knew, had been one of the cruelest prisons of all. Behind her inside the chamber, Obinna remained seated long after others began leaving. For the first time in years, he was alone with a version of himself he could no longer edit. That was his sentence before any formal one arrived. Nkiru did not turn back to look at him again. She had already seen enough. Fan 10. After the hearing, the city did what cities always did. It kept moving. Buses still argued with traffic. Street vendors still shouted over one another. Men still rushed into offices with lies in their pockets and prayers on their lips. Women still balanced groceries. Babies' grief and dignity all at once. The world did not pause because one truth had finally broken open. But inside Nkiru, something had shifted so deeply that even ordinary air felt different in her lungs. For 5 years she had lived with a wound that refused to stay in one shape. Some days it looked like abandonment. Other days it looked like shame. Then betrayal. Then grief. Then rage. Then confusion again. She had rebuilt her life while carrying pain that changed masks every season. But now, after hearing Obinna's own voice after seeing the last defenses collapse, the wound had finally revealed its true face. And because it finally had a face, it no longer had the same power to haunt her from the dark. 3 weeks after the hearing, Barrister Adeyeze arrived at the sanctuary with final papers for the first phase of asset recovery. Not all of Nkiru's father's land could be untangled immediately. Too many years, too many middlemen, too many opportunists who had eaten from the edges of the theft, but a significant portion had been restored to her legal control, along with financial damages tied to documented abuse and manipulation. Adeyeze laid the documents on Nkiru's desk. "You won't feel joy every minute," she said. "That is normal. Justice rarely feels as dramatic as suffering. It often feels quieter." Nkiru looked over the papers, fingers resting lightly on the margins. Quiet. Yes, that was exactly it. No trumpets, no trembling satisfaction, no wild celebration, just a long exhale the soul had been waiting years to release. "What will you do with it?" Adeyeze asked. The question was simple. The answer had already been growing inside Nkiru for a long time. She looked through the office window toward the outer courtyard of Rising Daughters Sanctuary. 2 women were learning tailoring under a shaded roof. A little girl chased bubbles blown by one of the volunteers. In another corner, a young mother read from an adult literacy workbook while her son slept with his cheek on her lap. "This place is too small now," Nkiru said. "Adeyeze." Eze followed her gaze. "Yes," she replied. Nkiru turned back to the documents. "Then we make it larger." And that was what she did. Not because she had forgotten what was taken from her, because she remembered exactly what it felt like to need one safe room in the world and not know whether such a room existed. Construction began 2 months later. The expansion site sat on land that had once symbolized greed, manipulation, and betrayal. Under Nkiru's direction, it became something else. A new residential wing, counseling rooms, a legal aid office, a skills training hall, a small clinic for women too frightened to enter ordinary medical spaces because too much had already been done to their bodies in the name of care. Mama Ifeoma walked the site one afternoon with her hands on her hips, watching workers haul cement and timber under the dry season sun. "Good," she said. "Make it strong. Men have weak consciences. Buildings must not copy them." Kunle nearly laughed himself, breathless. Dr. Ekene volunteered to help design the clinic protocols. Barrister Adeyeze helped structure a legal support unit for women trapped in inheritance. Fraud, domestic coercion, and abandonment. Ngozi, no longer just the curious girl from the roadside eatery, had become one of the sanctuary's most energetic staff members, fierce with every new resident and twice as fierce with anyone who spoke carelessly to them. Life had not only gone on, it had grown roots in healed ground. Yet healing Nkiru knew was not the same as erasing. There remained one unfinished thing. Obinna wrote to her twice after the hearing. The first letter was defensive, tangled in self-pity and spiritual language he hoped might soften memory. He wrote of pressure, humiliation, misunderstanding, and the cruelty of public disgrace. Nkiru stopped reading halfway through. The second letter was different, shorter, less polished, almost empty. It asked for one final meeting. No lawyers, no cameras, no debate. Just one chance to speak before he disappeared from the part of her life he no longer had any right to occupy. Nkiru read that one twice. Then she sat with it for 3 days. Not because she was tempted to go back. That road had been burned behind her long ago. But because closure, real closure, sometimes required walking to the edge of an old wound and choosing freely this time how close you wished to stand. In the end, she agreed. The meeting took place in the small chapel behind the sanctuary grounds just after sunrise. It was a quiet place, open on the sides with wooden benches and a simple cross at the front. No stained glass, no grandeur, only morning light and the sound of birds moving through nearby trees. Obinna was already there when she arrived. He stood when he saw her. He looked older than his years now, not in the noble way suffering can age the innocent. In the withered way guilt ages those who fight exposure too long. His suit was clean but plain. His shoulders, once carried with practiced confidence, now bent slightly, as if some invisible hand had rested there too heavily for too long. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nkiru sat on the front bench. Obinna remained standing until she glanced once toward the bench opposite. Only then did he sit. The silence between them did not feel hostile. It felt finished. "I didn't come for explanations," Nkiru said first. Her voice echoed softly through the chapel. Obinna nodded. "I know. Then say only what is true." He stared at the floorboards for several seconds before answering. "I don't know if I know how anymore." Nkiru looked at him steadily. "Then try for once." A long breath left him. When he finally spoke, the words did not sound clean. That was perhaps the first honest thing about them. "I was a greedy man before I was a cruel one," he said. "Then greed found pressure, and pressure revealed cruelty I used to think I could manage. I kept telling myself I was only trying to survive, only trying to stay afloat, only making hard choices. But—" his mouth tightened. "A man can rename evil for years and still wake up inside it." Nkiru listened without rescuing him from his own sentence. He went on. "I did not marry you for love the way I should have. Maybe there was some part of me that wanted to become better by standing near someone good. But the larger part of me wanted access, security, possibility. And once I had tied myself to your life, every obstacle started making me resent the very person I had used." He swallowed hard. "You." Nkiru's face remained composed, but her fingers intertwined once in her lap. Not from weakness, from impact. Some truths, even when already known, still bruise afresh when spoken plainly. "When you got sick, Obinna said I should have cared for you. Instead, I saw inconvenience. When you became pregnant—" His voice fractured there for the first time. "I knew it should have changed me, but I let fear of losing control become stronger than anything decent left in me." The birds outside fell abruptly quiet, as if the morning itself were listening. "I am not asking you to understand," he added. "I am not asking for mercy," good Nkiru said, "because I have neither of those to give you in that way." He nodded, accepting it. Tears did not come to him. That somehow made the moment sadder. Some people cry because remorse has reached them. Others no longer can because they have lived too long against their own souls. "I used to think my punishment was public shame," he said. "Losing business, losing respect, hearing my own words played back in rooms where people looked at me like rot." He lifted his eyes at last. "But that isn't the real punishment." Nkiru waited. The real punishment, he said, is that every decent thing I see now reminds me of what I was not. The sentence hung between them, and in that moment, Nkiru understood something quietly liberating. He was already living with it. Not redemption, not transformation she needed to supervise. Consequence. Internal, ongoing, inescapable consequence. She rose slowly from the bench. Obinna stood too, though he did not step closer. "I came because I needed to hear whether there was any truth left in you at all," Nkiru said. "Now I have heard enough." He looked at her, desperate for something he no longer knew how to name. Not love, not even forgiveness in the cheap sense, perhaps only acknowledgement that he had fully become what he feared. "Nkiru," she lifted one hand gently. "No, listen to me now." He fell silent. "For years I thought justice would mean seeing you suffer the way I suffered. But that was the part of me still bleeding. I know better now." Her eyes held his calm and luminous in the soft morning light. Justice was the truth. Justice was getting my name back, my father's legacy back, my voice back, my work back, my peace back. He lowered his gaze. Nkiru took one breath, then another. "I forgive you," she said. His head snapped up. But before hope could rise in him, she finished. "I forgive you so that what you did no longer rents space inside my spirit. I forgive you so I can walk forward without dragging your shadow. I forgive you because I refuse to become chained forever to the worst thing you chose." Her voice did not shake. But forgiveness is not reunion. It is not trust. It is not restoration of what you broke. It is release. Obinna's face crumpled, not theatrically, not beautifully, just the exhausted collapse of a man hearing the last door close with perfect fairness. Nkiru stepped back. "You will live with your choices," she said, "and I will live beyond them." Then she turned and walked out of the chapel. No dramatic backward glance, no hesitation. Just footsteps, steady and clean, carrying her from one life into the next. Outside, the morning had fully opened. Sunlight poured across the sanctuary grounds. Women were already sweeping the paths, hanging laundry, starting breakfast in the communal kitchen. Someone laughed near the training hall. A child ran past with a ribbon in her hand. The world that had once seemed to hold only loss now held movement, usefulness, tenderness, labor, recovery. Mama Ifeoma stood near the entrance to the new wing, supervising workers with queenly severity. When she saw Nkiru approaching, she studied her face once and understood enough not to ask foolish questions. "Well," she said. Nkiru looked at the half-finished building, at the women moving through its promise, at the sunlight resting warmly on walls built from what greed had once tried to poison. Then she smiled. Not the small, uncertain smile from the early days in the village. A full one. Quiet. Certain. Free. "It's over," she said. Mama Ifeoma nodded. "Good. Then start the rest." And Nkiru did. That afternoon she signed the final expansion papers. That evening she sat with new residents and listened to their stories without interrupting their dignity. That night before sleeping she stood alone for a moment under the open sky and pressed one hand to her heart, not in pain but in gratitude for the strength that had outlived cruelty. 5 years earlier she had been left on a road like discarded flesh. Now she had become a road for others. A way forward. A shelter. A witness that evil can wound deeply, but it does not get the final word unless the wounded surrender their future to it. Nkiru never forgot what happened, but memory no longer stood behind her with a knife. It walked beside her with purpose. And when dawn came again, as it always does, for those who keep living long enough to meet it, She stepped into the day not as the woman who had been abandoned, but as the woman who had returned from abandonment, carrying light. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come from a stranger. It comes from the person who once promised to protect you. And that is what makes stories like Nkiru's so powerful. She was not only abandoned on a lonely road, she was abandoned inside love, inside trust, inside the future. She thought she was building. But her life teaches something unforgettable. Being broken is not the end of a person's story. Sometimes it is the painful beginning of their true becoming. Nkiru did not heal because the world became fair overnight. She healed because she refused to let cruelty define her forever. She chose truth over silence. She chose dignity over revenge. She chose to rebuild even when every memory could have turned into bitterness. And in the end, that became her greatest victory. Not just that justice exposed the guilty, but that she reclaimed her name, her peace, and her purpose. She proved that evil may wound the innocent, but it cannot own their future unless they surrender it. That is the real lesson. Your darkest moment may feel like the place where everything ends, but it may also be the place where God, strength, and destiny begin rebuilding you into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than before. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to know what part moved you the most. And if you enjoy emotional, meaningful stories like this, subscribe and stay with us for more powerful journeys.